Katie, Toppel, Tan Huynh, and Carol Salva, thank you all for joining us on Highest Aspirations. As I said those names, I thought how lucky I am to have all of you on at one time. And we are really well represented geographically today. So I think we'll do something different. Let's start off by calling out where in the world everybody is calling in from as we record this episode. Carol, I'll start with you.
I am in Houston, Texas. So, yeah, and happy to be here.
Great. Katie, how about you?
I am joining this morning from Sun River, Oregon.
So we have Texas, Oregon. Tan?
Sabadi, that's how we say hello from Lao.
I love it. I love it. And I'm in where I always am in New Hampshire, just north of our Boston office, Ellevation Boston office, over the border. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and really one that's near and dear to everyone's heart at Ellevation as we work to kind of do the best we can to impact not only multilingual learners, but the teachers who serve them. And that's largely what you all are trying to do with this book about DIY professional development. So I want to start on a positive note. What do you think is going well for professional development, particularly for teachers of multilingual learners right now, as we kind of come out of or in that kind of fuzzy area where there's probably still a little disruption from the pandemic, but we're definitely coming out of it. So what's good now? What is happening right now that's positive?
The way we are learning right now is so different than the way we receive professional learning before. We never would have imagined of just having workshops online, right? Or having whole districts of students, of teachers, online learning from a person all the way from another country, or another person from if someone's on the West Coast, but they're learning from someone from the East Coast. Like never before have schools been more receptive to virtual instruction, virtual professional learning, and virtual collaboration. It has reduced the cost, it has shrunken the geographical distance, and it has changed really the face of professional learning forever. I'm so excited for the change. It means more access to schools, more access for teachers, and a different way of learning.
Yeah, the word that came out there that really was highlighted for me, at least, Tom, is receptive. The idea that schools and teachers and everyone is more receptive to this now, and before it seemed a little bit, professional development, at least for me as a teacher, was always something that I kind of feared because a lot of it was not good, quite frankly. But now we're seeing that we can bring in people from all over the world who are, coming in a variety of different formats, who are really experts in their field, and people are receptive and hopefully excited about it as well. All right, so that's a great kind of way to frame this. I want to read a quote from your book. So I have the book right here for those of you who aren't watching this on video, which is the vast majority of you who are just listening. And I want to read a quote, and the quote is, it's a little bit long, but I think it's worth reading because I really liked this quote, and I'm going to ask you to kind of respond to a few questions that I have on it. So bear with me as I read this. I'm going to do my best to read it eloquently. Teachers around the world began to read and share articles, watch videos, listen to podcasts, attend webinars, and connect with colleagues on social media. The learning was efficient and essential, driven by the immediate need to serve students differently. This type of learning, situationally appropriate and immediately applicable, was driven by personal choice and designed to reflect individual styles, needs, and preferences, is a powerful and transformative tool for teachers not only in times of upheaval, but also in the most typical of circumstances. It's also exactly the type of professional learning for which we'll advocate in this book. Our focus rests on assisting teachers in selecting content that is personally relevant, can forge helpful professional connections, and can promote forms of participation that are comfortable for educators with different learning preferences. And what I love about that quote is it's based on, if you didn't kind of figure it out, the upheaval of the pandemic, but it's still great for now. So a couple questions that I have kind of come out of that. We talked about how PD can change in a real positive note just now. Tanya, you laid that out. But this is a little bit of a devil's advocate question, but I want to ask anyway. Didn't the pandemic require teachers to work much harder to get what they needed? Question number one. And question number two, how can we sustain the type of PD that you're advocating for without putting even more on teachers' plates?
Yeah, I want to take that one. It speaks to me so much because we had been writing this book for over a year when the pandemic hit. And Katie and Ton and I had been offering virtual professional learning for free. Basically, what Ton said, we were trying to remove barriers for teachers to be able to personalize their learning. We'd been doing that for years with the ML Summit. It used to be called Virtuelle in the summer. And so that people received that very well. And what is great about reflecting on that is that is Virtuelle or ML Summit. That is a free conference on YouTube that no one's required to attend. That is a choice kind of thing. And we have so many educators that wanted to do it year after year because we created it in a way that you get what you want and as much as you want and when you want. Maybe you want to do 5 minutes this week, but it's personalized. And I know teachers will agree with me. It's not that we don't want professional learning. It's that we want it to be effective and we want it to be meaningful and we want it to be what we need when we need it. So when the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of writing this and it was this realization that it's not comfortable. It's cringy. It's uncomfortable because we had to. Change often is not something we look forward to. But I think we'll all agree that it's like what we're asking of our students. If you take this on, it would get easier the more you do of it. And as long as it's meaningful, we have students engaged, as long as it's relevant, as long as they feel themselves getting better at it. We can see it from the lens of how we want students to take ownership of their learning. So the three of us are just offering so many different entry points. I like one of the words that you said from that quote is what's comfortable.
Yeah.
Now we can look back and go, okay, so I didn't have a choice, but now I have these skills that I didn't know I needed. What can I do with them? And what's comfortable for me? And how much do I even want? Do I have 5 minutes this week? Or, do I want to sit there in an hour because I'm really into something that I have available to me? So I think that what I'm trying to express is we didn't choose to do, the world did not choose it. But it was the perfect storm of, okay, now that we're in it and we had no choice, how do we capitalize on it in a way that's comfortable?
Right.
And I would add too, you asked about, wasn't it harder for teachers to get what they needed? And I would almost argue the opposite, because due to the circumstances of, we could no longer engage in a typical model of PD because we couldn't be gathered together. That was just off the table at that point in time. And so that's when really people started thinking outside the box. And I feel like so much was readily available because we were all thrust into this circumstance of nobody was an expert on teaching the way we had to teach. Nobody was an expert on, you can no longer be in person with your students and you have to connect to them digitally from their homes, from your home. Like, it was all new. And so in a way, it's a little humbling of, we all have to start from the beginning to learn about this. But that's when this webinar came out and this webinar and this webinar, and really kind of the flexibility of somebody is sharing a webinar, but they're going to make the link available. So if you couldn't watch it at that time, you can watch it later. And that's part of the crux of our ideas, is it doesn't need to be here and now and this and one way. There's so much flexibility out there because circumstances were so hard that was one thing we needed to be better for us. We needed it to be easier. And I feel like people showed up. So many giving people put on free webinars and just made information available because we had to figure it out. And when somebody was like, hey, this is a good idea, they shared it openly, and then we all learned from each other. So it was kind of obviously not an ideal circumstance, but an organic way that really pushed a shift in how people learn, with some good outcomes of, hey, you know what? I can engage in something from my home. I can have worthwhile learning when I'm on the go. It doesn't have to be everyone gathered in a room listening to a professional speaker. It doesn't have to be that. It could, but there are just so many other ways. And I think that was that almost made it easier because there's so much available.
That's a great point. I was actually hoping to elicit that response because, again, it was a kind of a bit of a devil's advocate question. And I think that that's right. And a lot of the stuff that you are mentioning, the webinars and all the stuff that was put out there and available, is actually still available for folks. And a lot of it is still evergreen. And there's more stuff being produced every day. Now it becomes a matter of how do you curate it? How do you find the right thing, right? Which is a whole other discussion probably. But one thing that you mentioned that I can't resist, I have to kind of tell a little story about. You talked about nobody was an expert. So I have been for the last 7 years or so on a teaching team at the Harvard Graduate School of Education for a course called, wait for the title of the course, Connected Teaching in the Digital Age. So you would think that folks at Harvard, right, who are teaching graduate students how to best connect teachers digitally would be well prepared for the pandemic. But this course took place on campus in Cambridge. I had to commute like an hour and a half to get there, but I love doing it, so I did. And then it was spring semester. So in the middle of the pandemic happened, we went online. And guess what? We had no idea what to do. And it was messy and it was difficult. Not nearly, by the way, as difficult as you all who are teaching. I taught high school for 17 years. I can't even imagine doing what you all had to do during that time and still have to do it in a variety of ways. But it was not lost on me, the idea that we couldn't adapt quick enough. And it took us really a year to kind of figure it out for the next semester, but then things got better. And we started to see, wait a minute, we can bring in students from all over the world. They don't have to come to campus. We can bring in experts from everywhere. They don't have to come. We Zoomed people in, before that, but it was always messy and quirky. So anyway, the point there is that was universal. That wasn't just K-12. That was everywhere. So anyway, all right. Well, thanks for that, Katie. I think that's really, really important to talk about that. It did in many ways make things easier as long as you could access the information, which eventually most people could. So let's talk about, I want to get into the book a little bit here. And I want to actually spend the rest of our time talking about kind of the structure of the book. I know when you set out to write it, and again, you did this before the pandemic, you got together and listed all the things you had been doing to grow as educators. And if folks know of the work that you're doing, that's a lot. You're all over social media talking about that in lots of different places. From that list, you came up with 3 categories that eventually became the primary sections of the book. And one of the great things about these 3 categories is that I think they align kind of perfectly with the domains of language we work with to develop multilingual learners. I want to explore those categories one by one. But first, I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of the overall vision behind structuring learning in this way.
I can remember when the 3 of us came together in Texas to talk about the book and plan things out. And that was
in person?
Yeah. That was one of the ideas that was thrown out. And it was just, it clicked. It was like, yes, this is how it has to be, because our audience is educators of multilingual learners, and educators of multilingual learners are very familiar with interpreting, sometimes also called receptive learning and expressive learning and interactive learning. And so teachers, appreciate a good organizational structure or something familiar. So it was taking something that teachers are familiar with, that they know, that they use with their own students, and just pivoting it to apply to their own learning. And so it just seemed very natural that when we think of all these things for our own instruction to help students learn, they also very much apply to our own learning, that we should not limit our learning to one specific way, that we should have a variety, and just that there's so many different ways to learn, but they marry so well with kind of that integral structure of our field. And so we just thought it was such a natural fit and just really made sense. And then from there, that's when we started to kind of structure our action verbs. If you look through the book, each of the domains has specific action verbs, because we really wanted our readers to know that this is action. These are all actionable things that they can do. So within each category, then we came up with our list of actions that teachers can engage in for each of the domains.
You want to take us, Katie, into the first one, which is interpretive professional learning, unless Tan or Carol, you have something to add there with the overall structure.
Yeah,
okay.
Interpretive learning, I feel, is a wonderful place to start, because it's really what brought the 3 of us together, that we started engaging in what formerly was ELL Chat Book Club on Twitter. And we have since changed it to MLL Chat Book Club, but we came to know each other through deciding to engage in online virtual book studies. So interpretive learning is reading and watching and listening. Those are our action verbs in that category. And it's really where learners kind of just gather the information. And it is an avenue of professional learning that you really can engage in on your own, which I connect to as someone who loves to read and someone who doesn't always want to be social. We talk in the book about, many teachers are introverts, and kind of thinking and processing and engaging in creativity. Sometimes that really is fostered when you are on your own and learning through reading, or maybe listening to a podcast or watching videos. And then there are other layers and ways to enhance that. But the interpretive phase is really gathering the information and weaving it into what you currently know. So whatever your instructional or educational circumstances, you have a lot of background knowledge and history and experiences. And then you read something new, or you listen to something or watch something, and you go through that process of, oh, that's new, or I see how that fits with this experience, or oh, I see how that could work with this population of students I teach. And it's just kind of that information gathering and processing phase where there's so much new content out in the field. There's research, there's blog posts, there's so many different types of things to read. There's podcasts to listen to. There's just so much information. Interpretive is really that: take it all in, process it, and then go on to other areas and layers.
I want to follow up on what Katie just said, because originally I was thinking, or we were thinking, that receptive was the right term to use, because like she said, watching or listening or reading, the information is coming at you. And we changed that. It was a suggestion to change it, because when you've chosen to listen to a podcast like people are right now, it's not just receptive. You're interpreting it. You're thinking about the students that you serve. You're thinking about the role that you have in the district. You're doing more with what you're hearing mentally. That is, it's not just, somebody talking at you. You're interpreting what you are hearing or reading or watching. So I like that we changed that, because as Katie said, you have to honor people that is their preferred, and it's not just listening or watching or reading.
And one of our 5 C's in the book is choice. And there's something different about your lens and how you interpret when you have chosen what you're engaging in, compared to when it is just what your school is doing or your group of teachers, whatever it might be. And so often that mindset, when it is chosen for you, can be biased by kind of a negative influence of, this isn't for me. I mean, I know as an English language development teacher, there are times when the professional development does not apply to my role. And sometimes it can be hard to sit through that and find ways to make it relevant. But when you choose it, there's I swear there's something physiologically different in your brain and in your system when you're like, I chose this, I'm engaging in it. And just the way that you interpret it and process it, it's more relevant and engaging because of that onus that you chose it and it's what you wanted to learn about.
Yeah, and again, we see the reflection in our kids, both, and I'll say both in the students that I've taught and my own children, who one of which is an expert at, curating stuff that makes him happy to read. But when it becomes time to read something for school, as we all know, have all seen that bias kicks in, and it's a little bit more difficult to kind of break down those barriers. So that's a really good point. And I really love that you changed it, by the way, from receptive to interpretive, to what it's worth, because it really, the hope is that when somebody's listening to this, we bring in folks like you who are experts in the field, that people are actually trying to interpret it in a way that fits in their particular programs or their particular context. And that's kind of what I think we're all striving to do. So I think naming is important. And if you name something receptive, that's what it is. If you name it interpretive, I think that's what it becomes. And I also just want to call out too, this idea of calling out the fact that Not all teachers are extroverts. Some, in fact, are introverted, and this is a great way to learn for those people. And a great way to kind of stretch for other people who maybe are extroverts, which I think is just as important. So speaking, oh, go ahead, Tan.
Yeah, Katie just mentioned one of our 5 C's. And I think this, when we came together and we thought about like, okay, what makes professional learning really effective? We looked at the research and we came up with the 5 C's of choice, continuity, community, connectedness, and costs. And we see these as levers. So we see this as for teachers, they can choose to turn up the levers on each of these based upon their circumstances. But they can also, for district leaders or principals or professional development providers or facilitators, they can also think about their professional learning in this term of like, how can we give more choice to teachers?
Mm-hmm.
How can we make this session more community-based? How can we reduce the costs or make it free? Or how can we incentivize teachers to participate in this, even though there is cost, right? How can this be used again and again, integrated throughout the year? So we thought like the cornerstone, one of the main things about working with multilingual students is like differentiating instruction. If that's true for students, why don't we differentiate instruction or professional learning for teachers? And these are the 5 ways we differentiate professional learning for ourselves: by choice, continuity, community, connectedness, and costs.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ton. That's important. I think that is kind of a foundational element of what we're talking about. Again, like I can't help but bring up that's another connection to the same way, we want to be teaching we want to do these things for our students. We could do these things as well for our teachers.
Can I interject something?
Of
Because
course.
I feel like Tan just did something important for the listener, is understanding how the book is structured and how those 5 C's and the bigger picture and why it's appropriate for anyone in education that works with multilingual learners. So something that we get lots of positive feedback is that throughout each chapter, there's this little try it out. Like, let's just say we're talking about interpretive webinars or a podcast, but it'll say try it out. There'll be this little cutout. And then it's specifically, if you're a teacher, here are some things you could try. If you're an instructional coach, here are some things you could try. If you are an administrator, here are some things you could try. So we challenged ourselves to write the entire book from 3 different lenses.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and those try it out things are multiple times in each chapter. So it's so user friendly. And even that's differentiated further for what your role is. Steve, we're super proud of this.
You as well, you should be. I mean, I have it in front of me, and it's that, like, we, at Ellevation talk a lot about the learn, teach, reflect model when it comes with this. And it's here in a way that is accessible to everyone. And as you said, differentiated for different people and with lots of different ideas. And no surprise, given the 3 folks that you have, that have come together to write this book, I'm not surprised that it's quite well done. So I want to stay with, and I'm happy to take these detours. I think that's kind of the beauty of what we're doing in these conversations. I always tell everybody I don't have a script, right? We're just kind of walking through some information. But I do want to finish with, we said we'd talk about the 3 pieces. We said interpretive professional learning. We talked about that. We still have expressive and interactive. So let's go to that expressive professional learning, which may at first glance seem to kind of stray from what we know as professional development. In fact, like in my brain, as in the marketing team at Ellevation, it looks kind of a lot like marketing to me. But what is it, and why is it important for educators of multilingual learners?
When we think about instruction, again, like we think about comprehensible input, right, and comprehensible output for multilingual learners. Well, it's the same way for professional learning. There's comprehensible input, but if teachers are not engaging with output, there is no learning, or not a lot of learning, or the engagement is not as high as it could be. So we thought about, okay, you can listen to a podcast, you can read a book, you can watch a webinar, but is that just the only thing we can do? No, we can talk about the book. We can talk about the podcast. We can watch the video together and have conversations. What we can do is we can create whatever we're learning or we're taking in. We can create a community around it where we can talk about it. For some people, they don't want to talk about it, where they can write about it in like a microblog, such as a tweet, or they can just go on like Instagram and do a very quick video, right? It's anything where teachers can process and communicate what they understand. It's kind of like the quote, tell me and I will forget, show me and I will remember, involve me and I will learn. So we wanted to have teachers think about okay, you're given this professional learning, how can you take it in a way that's more interactive for you? How can you do something with it so that it shows you how to process the information? It really is simply can be simply as just sitting with a colleague and saying, hey, these are my notes. These are, or sitting through a webinar or an in-person workshop and writing sketch notes, drawing pictures, something that it makes it more active. And that's what we really want. We want just teachers to think, how can I just be more than a vehicle to receive, but also to communicate what I understand, to process what I understand.
And I appreciate you bringing up the various forms of processing. I think that's really important. And one thing that I'll go back to that graduate course for which I was part of the teaching team, when we went virtual, we lost a lot of in-person discussion moments that this may be controversial to say, but in my mind, there's nothing like an in-person discussion. I thrive on that. That's me. Someone else was so excited to be able to now have a back channel that they could use and process their thoughts in a written way, that's not kind of how I work, but we're stretching each other to do different things. We're learning about different things. And so I think, the traditional PD, we have somebody speaking and then there's a session, maybe there's a turn and talk, maybe people raise their hands, but the addition of all of these, and it's not new, right? But it's just adding different elements to it and kind of making those count as ways of expressive professional learning, or as ways to make sure that you're not just taking in information, but you're doing something with it. Carol, look, you had something to add there.
Yeah, I mean, so the three of us have created, and many people listening to have created content for the world without getting a professional learning, without the receptive piece. I mean, basically, you probably get receptive learning all of the time, or interpretive learning all of the time, but you decide to create something, a blog post, a podcast, what we're doing right now. I love what Tan's talking about, the more of the interactive piece. Once you get the interpretive, then doing something with it that you might not have had the opportunity to interact with the speaker or whatever it was. So you can take it upon yourself to go be interactive about it and create something. But it's not necessary that you have that interpretive. You can just be doing a blog. You could just be reflecting in your own journey of learning and creating a blog, or doing a podcast, or create a webinar, or do a newsletter for your campus based on what you know and what you'd like to share. That professional learning of just creating that thing is what we really underscore in this chapter of expressive. You are just creating something, whether it's writing or speaking or recording, you're creating something. And like Tan said with his quote, if I'm involved in doing that, of course we know it requires more. The one who gets the most out of it is the one who had to create the session or create the newsletter or create the podcast. So that second chapter is really about some way of expressing, and lots of different examples from the field are there. But what do you get out of it when you create that thing, when you write that thing, when you record that thing? It's just so many different ways that can be done.
And we emphasize too, you don't have to create for an audience. You can create just for yourself.
Great point.
But there is an added benefit. And when we get into the interactive piece, this comes in and layering together, you can create something that is just for you. And then you can choose to share it, and it benefits others. But that moment you take to process and kind of reflect on what you know and how you could explain it to someone else, or just that flow of ideas if you're blogging or taking notes. There's so many ways to just make sure. For me, it's a memory thing. If I don't write something down or draw pictures, chances are I may not remember it.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot, just a lot happens. We're all busy people. It's hard to really just retain everything. But when you make a visual or just go through that process of really reflecting, it solidifies what you've learned even more. And then that added bonus of, hey, you can take something cool that you created and you can share it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just before break, I was asked that after our winter break, my partner and I will be sharing strategies for language, infusing language in reading and math. And it's been at the back of my mind all break. Like, okay, I have a lot of ideas and I use a lot of strategies. Now I have to filter this for an audience. I cannot talk long. This is not an hour and a half session. This is a tidbit in a staff meeting. What is the most critical information to share? And so at some point during this break, that's a process I'm going to go through. Is here are all of my ideas, and okay, could I create something that's really visually appealing that teachers could kind of keep by their computer or with their lesson plan book? We talk about infographics and things like that, because in our busy world where attention spans can be a challenge,
Yeah.
having that just like something that's appealing to look at, something that really just critically hits the information that teachers need, that's where it's at. And so not everyone enjoys reading the entire book, but if we can read the entire book and find key points and make something in a pretty package, just say, here's really the essential piece that we want everyone on staff to know, that's great. And then maybe someone else does it. And then we get their kind of, consolidation of ideas. And just that's where really the reflection and learning can be extended to wider audiences. So it's not just your learning, but you can share more widely.
I think about that so often, everything that you just mentioned. And the first thing I'll say is that process of doing that, what you're about to do, kind of bringing something down to something very simple to show, maybe you have 2 minutes or 5 minutes to show it. What a process for the person creating it to really understand and, bring out what the main points are for a specific audience. Then, of course, sharing it with other people, it's just incredible value. We'll get into the interactive in a second, which will, I think this process will lead us into. But I think about it all the time because, we've done, I don't know, almost 300 of these episodes, right? Not everybody listens to podcasts. That's just not everybody's thing. Not everybody has the time to listen to a podcast that goes over a half an hour long. So I think about, it's always a question of like capacity, how much time do we have? But I think about often, how can we make these like amazing expert, recommendations more actionable? And so we've tried to do that on the blog and make some quick takeaways. But I was literally driving this morning and I was thinking about that. What can we do like next season to make can we do like a 2-minute like quick takeaways from this? And it's the same thing. The process of doing that is super beneficial. And then the person, that's actually listening to it, or the people that are listening to it or reading it or whatever, seeing a visual, are going to benefit from that. And we could stay on that point forever, but I want to like kind of switch gears into interactive. And so that kind of leads us to interactives. Once you have this thing, people can kind of interact around it. Interactive professional learning, I think, is exactly kind of what it sounds like. So maybe for this one, take us through the steps an educator should take to learn in this way and talk a little bit about the value in it. And Carol, maybe you can kick us off there.
So it's hard to talk about the first two without talking about the interactive piece. We've already talked about if you listen to a podcast that you love, you're going to get a lot out of it because you chose it. And then, like we said before, but could you take that to the next level? So the prior chapter where it was expressive, you could, be as simple as having a journal next to your bed, and a couple of times a week, you jot a sentence down of something you don't want to forget. It doesn't have to use none of these things have to use technology, but so you're expressing yourself in that journal, but you're just interacting with yourself, really. It's definitely worth it. Like Katie said, you get so many benefits out of expressing yourself, the memory piece, the reflective piece, and all of that. But what we're really taking a deeper dive into the interactive chapter, the three verbs, the three sections of this chapter are: how do you engage? How do you engage with others? How do you collaborate with others? We started with just connecting with others. Those verbs, connect, engage, collaborate, is really where we're offering ideas. The whole book has just ideas from the field of, people to follow and watch how they do these things. So we could do that with this podcast. Let's say you're getting an interpretive PD opportunity here, and then you could make some notes for yourself. And there you have the receptive piece, the interpretive piece, and the expressive piece. But once I go to Voxer or pick up the phone and call Katie or Tan, like we often do, we often collaborate after we've seen something together, then it's interactive. You're interacting with someone else. That can be the teacher down the hall. It could be Tan on the other side of the world. But I'm not just expressing myself. I'm listening to their point of view. I'm connecting. I'm engaging with someone else. It can look like a lot of things. It can look like a lot of things. We just have so many opportunities to do this with 1 minute or to do this with a project. What would Tan or Katie, what would you guys add to that? Because this is just, to me, one of the most fun parts. This is where, with my own students, where it really changed my lens for what they were able to do. There's a quote in the book by Leo Gomez, who's someone I studied under for dual language. If the top 25% of your class can do something, the entire class can do it, because they're going to engage with each other and collaborate. And so that's kind of the thing that we're talking about here is I'm going to learn from someone else. I'm going to offer what I know. And in the collaboration, we know we're all going to be better together. Tan and
Yeah, I
Kate.
think I was thinking that the multiple perspectives gives you, it informs kind of a feedback loop of reflection, because I might know what this looks like in a co-teaching setting with a group of kindergarten students in Oregon, in my student population. But maybe when someone tries it in, rural Iowa, it's different. And so when you can hear from other teachers in other contexts, it really just helps kind of broaden your understanding. And that's especially important when we go on to lead professional learning for wider groups of teachers, because I teach elementary, but when I get Carol's perspective on older students, I have a better understanding of the broad spectrum of learners that teachers could encounter. So, when you go to a professional learning situation and the speaker is speaking about a smaller subset of a population, and maybe they don't have expertise in older students or SLIFE students or newcomers or whatever it might be, that feels less relevant. And so the more we learn from each other, it's more input to be able to have a clear understanding of how strategies and ideas and research apply across the field and not just to our particular instructional or professional setting. And just engaging with people from different backgrounds. I mean, there's just our Twitter PLN, we just hold in such high regard because it's international, and it allows us to engage with people who are not like us, who don't have the same background, the same location, just so many different elements of diversity that it informs our learning from just so many different angles, and allows it to not kind of be our like, what's the word? A narrow view, I guess.
Yeah, I have a story about that. Because I often talk about translanguaging, and I often use the words like, allow your students to translanguage. And then someone on Twitter was like allow. Why would you allow your student? And it's like, I'd never thought about that. If I didn't tweet that out, I would have never thought of that way, because I engage with my professional learning community by expressing like, okay, this is what I'm doing to translanguage. and I used the word allow, and then someone pushed back, and I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness that I engaged with Twitter in this way. And if I'm grateful for that person to say, I want you to reconsider your the word allow, and like, is that really equitable? And so that's just one story of example of so many other stories where like someone has influenced my thinking, has shaped my way of practice because I interacted with the community. Because, in our own heads, we always think we're right. But when someone else interacts with us, we're like, oh, you know what? I guess this is another example. Like the book that we wrote together is so much better because of Carol and Katie were there, right? The book that I would have written by myself would have paled in comparison to what they both added to the book. And so same thing, when we express our ideas, share with the community, someone else is going to help us grow or reinforce our ideas, so that we it's kind of like a butterfly, and you know how when it pushes out of the cocoon, it has to have some resistance. If not, the butterfly wings actually won't have the juice, won't have the fluids that go in to the different veins of the wings to actually push it out of its cocoon.
That's a great way to put it. And Tan, I'll add a couple things that maybe you may perhaps have been too humble to say or just left out. Probably the former. I think in order to do what you just talked about, number one, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to put stuff out there that, even though you may feel strongly about it, but you may get some pushback. That's number one. Number two, you need to be open to feedback, right? And so those are two really, really important elements here. And I think by being open to feedback, you're now allowing others, or encouraging, maybe I shouldn't use allow, encouraging others to be vulnerable as well. And that opens the door for a lot of really high quality conversations and leaning in rather than calling out. So, it's a wider conversation, but I couldn't help but think of that as you brought up that example. It's a great example. Yeah, so much here. And I think that like walking through, I wasn't, honestly, like as I was structuring this, because there's so much in the book, and I'm glad you brought up the C's as well, because there's so much in there. When I thought about it, I'm like, well, let's do the interpretive and the expressive and the interactive, because I think it kind of will follow a flow. And I'm glad, I think it did. So I hope that worked for people who are listening to kind of understand how those work together. You all did a great job describing them all. I want to zoom out a little bit in the kind of little few minutes that we have left. And I think most of what we've talked about here is probably geared toward an individual teacher, perhaps a group of teachers that are looking to do what the book says, which is DIY PD, figure out what works for them, and then have a structure in place so that they can get something out of it. I want to zoom out a little bit, though, and talk about what do you think school leaders, because there's many that listen to this, and administrators, say multilingual learner administrators, need to know, or need right now, to implement high quality, sustainable, job embedded PD for their teachers to best support multilingual learners. This is a great start. Like and perhaps it's a structure in and of itself. You tell me, what is it that they need most, given everything that's out there?
I think if we look at our C's, Katie, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. That's why we wrote this book. We intentionally made sure that the resources and the ideas in the book are applicable not just to the individual teacher, but also to instructional coaches and administrators, and even not just principal administrators, but district level, curriculum and instruction type administrators. The 5 C's are relevant. And that's why we wanted to provide that understanding of kind of the multiple avenues that you can explore and investigate professional development, because so many times it is not what people want that happens. And that's really disheartening when you are sitting in a professional development session that's been planned and all of the teachers are getting the same thing and you don't find relevance. And so for a leader, they need to know that connectedness piece of what is connected, and that is different for different people. The PE teacher does not have the same sense of relevance when it comes to professional learning as the science teacher, as the language arts teacher, as the music. Like there's so many different teachers. And so I think that, one, I would really encourage goal setting and reflection, because as the administrator, I want to know the goals of my individual teachers. It is not easy to plan one type of professional learning that's going to meet everyone's needs. And so you need to understand where people are coming from and what they want to learn in order to kind of then delve into some of the different ideas we present of, are we going to run a book study? Are we going to, identify a list of podcasts to listen to? Are we going to hire a professional speaker to come in and then have breakout groups where people can have discussions and interact around something that really sparked their interest? I'm seeing in my context more choice, more interest in having teachers kind of group based on what they're really passionate about. And even within all of the EL specialists who are doing the same job, we have different levels of expertise and different areas of interest. And so admin is fostering that and saying, what do you really care about? What do you really want to learn about? Okay, all of you go sit together and talk about that and engage in discussion. And then maybe it's more organic that groups who have shared interests decide, we want to read this book, or we want to watch this webinar, or we would really like funds to invite this speaker. But it's based on self-reflection and goal setting so that there really is authentic drive and interest. And then of course there's the issue of cost. Budgets are not unlimited, but at least you can start from a place of, maybe some people just want to buy a $20 book and that's less expensive than a professional speaker. Or maybe people just want to gather around and, watch a webinar that's free. And so maybe you're going to pay for snacks, but you're not actually going to have a cost for the source of learning because it's a free webinar that was shared openly on somebody's webpage or on Twitter, or whatever it might be. There's just so many avenues. I feel like I would go back to reflection, goal setting, and fostering that independent ownership and choice for teachers.
That was exactly what I was going to pull out. The last sentence that you said, so I won't say it again. I think that's crucially important. Carol, Tan, anything to add there? This will be kind of the last. We'll wrap it up here. I mean, I guess it would be interesting if you want to take a stab at this to think about, well, what if, Katie said budgets are not unlimited, and that's true. What if they were? Should we talk about like this, pie in the sky stuff, or we can go with the other question, which is basically thinking about leadership and what they need to do?
Well, even if I had an unlimited budget, I would want to choose wisely. I just want the most effective thing. That's why cost is one of the things. Is like, even if you have zero budget, we really initially started talking about this book for the teacher that is in a district in a remote area that has no access to professional learning being offered to them. And what can you do on your own for free? It's just immense, the opportunities that are out there and powerful. So whether I had an unlimited budget or not, I would still want to make it more learner centered. So what do the teachers, what does your staff want? What are their preferred learning styles? What do they want to do? And what I love about this resource is it makes it easy for you to do that. As an administrator, this book steps you through, try this, try this, try this, and you are offering personalized. It seemed so elusive before, how you could personalize or differentiate. Let's use that word. It's the parallels are direct. I have a class full of students that all have different backgrounds, different levels, different language, different speed at which they're learning. And I have to differentiate for them as a teacher. So the administrator doing that for the staff or doing that for the district, it's the same thing. And we're offering you ways to do it that are practical and don't have to cost a lot of money at all. Now, we've had districts, our first district to hire us to come in and do a professional learning on this book. And so that people have some dedicated time to try things out. I find I just find it was Mansfield ISD here in Texas. And so a big group of people, so that at the end of the day, they have more in their tool belt, because like Katie said earlier, there's no time. Every day there's a new lesson that has to be created. And so dedicating professional learning time that's actually going to have your staff taking more ownership because they see how easy it is and it's more meaningful to them. I think that is one of the most important things that leadership can think about right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do I dedicate time to this? So Tan and I have both done a PD, half day and full day professional learning, where we let people try these things out, and we're modeling strategies too that work well in classrooms. But that has taken off. Prince William just ordered hundreds of copies of this book because they see the value in holding their teachers, their educators, and their leaders in high regard. They can take their own professional learning, and it's not like we're going to stop doing professional learning with them, but they want them to have it be as powerful. Any professional learning that they do or teachers find on their own, they want them and their administrators and their coaches to have the opportunity to make the most of it. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and let me shout out
And
Prince William for a second here, because Carol, you and I have talked about that district. I've had the pleasure of having a few folks on from that district in the podcast. I visited, wrote a case study about how they're using our Ellevation math program, and they are they are so strategic about what they do. They move in the right direction and they make adjustments when they need to. And so I guess my point here, people listening and aren't familiar with Prince William, if a district like that made the decision to look at this book and to purchase hundreds of them, then you know that it was a good decision, because I can guarantee you that there were a lot of conversations about, how that was going to work for them. Katie, I think I interrupted you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to say, and it's not as though as an administrator, then you're hands off because you've given teachers just free rein in professional learning. The book gives you the structure of teachers might engage in interpretive professional learning based on their goals and what they want to learn. But then you structure opportunities for them to take what they learned and to create something to reflect on what they've learned. And there's choice in that. They might create an infographic. They might just write down a stream of thoughts about what they learned. They might put it on a sticky note. It might be tabs in a book. It might be there's a wide variety, so teachers can again have ownership and agency in choosing how they create something to reflect what they've learned. Then you move everyone into that interactive piece where then things are shared and they learn from one another. They learn how to collaborate. They learn how to present to their peers and showcase what they've learned. They learn how to co-present and engage with others, and just it moves from being everyone on their own trajectory of professional learning to everyone on a collective shared trajectory of professional learning, where everyone reciprocally benefits from what everyone else has learned. So maybe I'm not super into reading books and going down like a whole research avenue on social emotional learning, but maybe one of the kindergarten teachers is, and maybe she does that and shares with me. And then when we co-teach together, I've shared with her, she shared with me, we're better together. And that's kind of then the broader perspective. So an individual teacher can take this book and engage in all the different layers, but an administrator or a district can also do that and kind of empower teachers to make independent choices, but also carry them along in kind of a collective way so that everybody individually and interdependently gains from it.
Yeah. And it seems like
so
along the way,
I'm sorry.
Seems like along the way you can pull those levers, right? That Tom was talking about earlier, to figure out kind of what works for your particular district. Let's take one more thought, Carol, and then we'll wrap it up with my last question.
Just that it's just the meta awareness that we're helping people realize, I'm learning like this. This is important. We have other districts like Springfield who just did the book study on it. And so we have a book study that they can do. And so there are the way that what we're talking about in the book is how you can use the book. It all just kind of keeps folding onto itself. So yeah, it's great.
So many different entryways, many different pathways. Before I ask you the last question, which is about books, but not about this book, let me say that the name of the book is DIY PD, A Guide to Self-Directed Learning for Educators of Multilingual Learners. And I have it on my desk and I've been through it, and that's kind of how I framed the questions, and I definitely recommend it. So let's talk about other books. As you probably know, in the podcast, the last question I ask everybody, and it's largely a selfish question because I need to know what I need to read, but it's hopefully beneficial to others as well, is if there's a book or a film or any other resource that has had an important influence on you personally or professionally that you'd like to share. And Tan and Carol, you've done this before, so I'm going to start with Katie. I'm going to limit you. I'm going to be strict. I'm going to limit you all to one. Everybody wants to do 3 or 4, but there's 3 of you, so you only get one: the book and the author and why it's important to you. Katie, go ahead.
This is a hard question because I read a lot, but I have an answer. I would say a book that was really pivotal for me is Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. I read it years ago, but it's something that just helped me understand that the way students learn is connected to brain research and it's physiological. And especially now, we've had several trainings on trauma-informed practice, and kids, families, teachers, everybody has gone through so much in the pandemic. And that information that she shares about brain science and about the way the brain reacts to stress and so many things are just absolutely essential to working with children in classrooms when there has been trauma, there has been collective trauma, and just so much in our lives. So that is one that if anyone has not read it, I highly recommend it. I think she's working on a new book, and I really can't wait until she puts more out because she is absolutely brilliant.
Agreed. It's on my shelf and it's amazing. So if you haven't read that one, go for it. We'll link to it in the show notes and in the blog post episode. Carol, you're not muted, so I'll go to you.
Oh, Emily Francis's book that just came to mind right away, because it's different than a biography about her life, which her life is amazing, but she is an immigrant that went through so many hard things as a young person. So they're letters to her students. So you get to hear the stories, Emily's stories. And so it's called If You Only Knew: Letters from an Immigrant Teacher. And I just recommend class sets of this for secondary students and even elementary students, maybe read alouds and things, because it's very powerful. That's Emily Francis.
I'm biased because I know Emily and she was just with you, Carol, in our Impact conference as well. And she's amazing, but I'm halfway through it and it's unbelievable. It's really, 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 really well done. I got a copy about a week ago and it's great. So we're 2 for 2 with books that are on my bookshelf. Tan, surprise me.
I bet this will not be on your bookshelf, but because we all 4 of us read like lots of educational books and educational webinars, sometimes they need to step back and I need a narrative.
I like it.
So I look for books that help me understand students and hear their stories. So there's a book by Catherine Applegate, a New York Times award-winning author, and she wrote a book about a Sudanese kid running away from the Civil War, and she writes in prose. And so we follow him from his journey from Sudan to America and what that's like for him. And so he's a slave, right? And so I'm like, wow, this is what it's like for them. And so I was transformed and moved and taken back in a different way than I could have with the other professional books. It's like another perspective that we need the educational books, like the pedagogy books, but we also need to couple it with student stories. Just like Emily's stories, this is just a different story.
Wait, did I miss the name? Did you tell us the name?
Home of the Brave.
Home of the Brave. Awesome. Okay. 3 very, very different books. I really, really appreciate those, and I appreciate everything else as well. I'm going to post on the blog post and on the show notes how folks can learn more about the work that you're doing. So you can go there to find notes as well. But really quickly, if there's a preferred place that people can learn more about the work you're doing, Katie, I'll start with you.
Mostly these days, I'm sharing on Twitter. I share a lot of examples of what lessons I'm creating for my students. So that's kind of from the classroom perspective. I think where people can find me is on Twitter.
Great. And what's your handle?
At Katie Toppel, KATIETOPPEL.
Awesome. And we'll link to that as well. How about you, Carol?
Definitely, I'm on Twitter daily like Katie, but I think the most supported place would be my blog. It's salvac.edublogs.org. And the podcast notes and the videos and everything and connecting to me on Twitter and everything is there.
a treasure trove of resources there for sure. Tan, how about you?
So Twitter as well. The handle is Tan K Win, which is also my blog, which has about 150 articles as well.
Yeah, so anybody who's listening can see that the three people we brought on here have I don't know how they do it. I really have no understanding of how they do it all, but they do, and they love it, and they're passionate, as you can tell. And I'm just very grateful that you all take the time to chat with me every once in a while. And second or third time, Tan, you and Carol, first time with you, Katie, and I hope to do it again sometime soon about another topic, perhaps. So let's stay in touch.